Well, we come to this great book. And I want to do this. I want to go through some of the initial things relating to the book, things that your textbook covers as well in detail. And I want to just do it very quickly. But then in our second hour, I want to stand back and speak more specifically about the missionary function of this book, the mission tendency of the epistle to the Romans. And so we'll deal with that secondly. I believe that this book is incredibly potent in terms of the call to the ministry, the focus of the ministry, and especially in our own day, the calling of the church to be a mission church, to spread the gospel to the ends of the age, to the ends of the world, and also to the coming of Christ, of course, and to do so with zeal, with clarity, with passion, with expectation, and all the rest. And so we'll focus on that in our second hour. But first of all, Rome in Greek literally means strength. And it's especially Roman power that was in focus whenever people thought of Rome, the imperial power. Rome took over the cultural heritage and the political heritage of Alexander, west of the Euphrates, and became his real successor. It accomplished politically what he had imagined and envisioned as doing for the world. And Augustus, who was, of course, instrumental in solidifying Roman rule and expanding it, he was said by Philo to have exterminated wars, both of an open kind as well as the covert, which are brought about by the raids of brigands. This is he who cleared the sea of pirate ships and filled it with merchant vessels. It is he who reclaimed every state to liberty, who led disorder into order and brought gentle manners and harmony to all unsociable and brutish nations, who enlarged Hellas by many a new Hellas and Hellenized the outside world in all its important regions. He was the guardian of peace, who dispensed their dues to each and all, who did not hoard his favors, but gave them to be common property, who kept nothing good and hidden and excellent hidden throughout his life. The whole inhabitable world voted him no less than celestial honors. These are so well attested by temples, gateways, vestibules, and porticos. And this is Augustus. So this is the context here when we're dealing with Rome. And Paul has set his sights on Rome. Rome is the city that he wants to use as the base for his next stage of mission. Antioch having been his first base, now he seems to be shifting in focus to Rome. And he has not planted Rome, the church in Rome. It's likely that it was planted by people who returned from Pentecost, because we are told in Acts chapter 2 there are strangers there from Rome on the day of Pentecost. And they had existed already for some time. By 52 A.D., Aquila and Priscilla had been there, and they were expelled, actually, from Rome around 52 A.D. under Claudius. Suetonius, a Roman historian, says that Claudius expelled Jews from Rome because of their constant disturbances, impelled by Chrestus. Now, there's some debate over who that was. Maybe that was a reference to Christ, and he's got the spelling wrong. Some think it was actually a person in Rome, a Jewish person. But at any rate, there's an interesting possibility that this is a reference to that early community made up maybe partially of Christians. Now Paul knows quite a number from this church. He gives greetings to them in the 16th chapter. And he sends greetings from Gaius, probably the leader of the church in Corinth. So there seems to have been, he seems to be writing here from the vicinity of Corinth, and even likely he's from Cenchrea, the port of Corinth. He commends to the recipients Phoebe from this city of Cenchrea, Corinth. And maybe she was the one taking the letter, perhaps with an entourage of others, but at any rate he makes mention of her. Okay, and he wants this letter to reach the Romans before he gets there. He wants to outline for them the gospel. He wants to impart to them some spiritual gift. He wants to use this place as a base for further missions. And so he sends them this glorious letter to the Romans. Irenaeus says in Against Heresies that Peter and Paul were responsible for laying the foundations of the church. However, this probably does not mean that they laid the foundations institutionally, but rather theologically. First Paul and then Peter. Now, if you were interested in using a church as a base for ministry and missions, and you were writing to them, what would you write them? You're called by God to spread the gospel. You have a distinct calling to do so, not to Jews only, but to Greeks, to those who are unschooled in the gospel and in the Old Testament by and large. That's your calling. God has burdened you with it. It's very clear. You've been doing this for a while. You see a church that you believe can be used in your ministry, and you write them. What do you write them? Well, Paul wrote them this grand epistle, which has been of such significance to the church throughout history, especially the Reformation Church, and also even today. Well, the author we've spoken about, he's Paul, of course, very clearly, and he's writing from Cenchrea. I've covered basically all those points. It's a summary of his thought prior to going to Jerusalem for a final time to defend the gospel. And he's planning here, as he himself says in chapter 15, to go to Rome, and then from Rome westward. Look with me at chapter 15, 26 through 33. 15:26. But now I go unto Jerusalem to minister unto the saints, for it hath pleased them of Macedonia and Achaia to make a certain contribution for the poor saints which are at Jerusalem. It hath pleased them verily, and their debtors they are. For if the Gentiles have been made partakers of their spiritual things, their duty is also to minister unto them in carnal things. When therefore I have performed this, and have sealed to them this fruit, I will come to you, by you, into Spain. And I am sure that when I come unto you, I shall come in the fullness of the blessing of the gospel of Christ. Okay, so that's his intention here. Now, we've mentioned before already the new perspective on Paul, this new school of thought, which is not really new, but it's received some attention and some force in our own day. And I list for you here the work of E.P. Sanders, James Dunn, and N.T. Wright. We deal with this more in biblical theology, so I just want you to know that they have a view on this book and on other writings from Paul that do not interpret justification in the Reformation sense of the word, but in an alternate sense of the word, which I believe is corrupt and heterodox. But we will leave that aside for now and leave that for another time. I think the theme of the gospel, theme of the book of Romans, is basically that of the righteousness of God. Everything relates to this. The righteousness of God opened up in the gospel. First of all, incriminatingly. That takes us through the first 3 chapters, broadly speaking, 1:18 to 3:20. The righteousness of God is revealed from heaven, we are told in 1:18. The wrath of God, I should say. The wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who hold the truth in unrighteousness. So Paul takes full aim here at that which is opposed to righteousness, unrighteousness. As man, both Jew and Gentile, is constantly promoting it and fostering it and attacking the righteousness of God, the character of God. Look, for example, at 2 verse 5. But after thy hardness and impenitent heart treasurest up unto thyself wrath against the day of wrath and revelation of the righteous judgment of God, who will render to every man according to his deeds. Okay, so there you have the righteousness of God viewed incriminatingly. God has no respect of persons, verse 11. There will be a judgment for all. As many as have sinned without the law will perish without the law. And everyone who has had the law and sinned in the law shall be judged by the law. Okay, so the righteousness of God incriminatingly. Now it shifts in 3:21. It's interesting, 3:20 ends in such a remarkable way, doesn't it? Therefore by the deeds of the law there shall no flesh be justified in his sight, but for by the law is the knowledge of sin. Verse 19, just before that, is said that all the world may become guilty before God, and every mouth may be stopped. And so this is the righteousness of God viewed incriminatingly. But secondly, you have the righteousness of God viewed savingly, or salvifically, or soteriologically. And here we go all the way to 8:27. Here, Paul opens up the righteousness of God in Jesus Christ, in His death and resurrection, and in salvation as it is handed out from out of that death and resurrection. Notice 3:21. But now, nun in the Greek, kai nun or de nun, I forget what it is. Nun, but now the righteousness of God without the law is manifest, being witnessed by the law and the prophets, even the righteousness of God which is by faith of Jesus Christ unto all, and upon all that believe, for there is no difference. And he goes on to explain what this righteousness of God is. Specifically in verse 24, being justified freely by His grace through the redemption that is in Christ Jesus. So justification, he goes into the soteriological manifestation of the righteousness of God in justification, which is built on and based on redemption. Which in turn, through redemption that is in Christ Jesus, which in turn is built on propitiation. Verse 25. Whom God hath set forth to be a propitiation through faith in His blood, to declare His righteousness for the remission of sins that are past through the forbearance of God, to declare, I say at this time, His righteousness, that He might be just, and the justifier of him which believeth in Jesus. It was very interesting. This is the key to Romans in terms of what it's all about. The righteousness of God viewed soteriologically. You have there righteousness revealed and opened up in justification, which is based on redemption. As it is in Christ, which is based on propitiation, God being satisfied, propitiation, God being satisfied, His wrath being satisfied and satiated in the death of Christ. in order that through faith in his blood, mentions specifically blood here, faith, as it